Good afternoon. My name is Bruce Jackan, and I'm from the Lexington Veterans Association. I'd like to welcome you, as well as our fellow veterans watching via Zoom at the Edith Norris Rogers Veterans Hospital in Bedford. Please rise if you are able and join Bob Lewis as he leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Bob. Our presentation today will be in two parts. Part one, I'll speak for about 25 minutes on the Polish Armed Forces in World War II. In part two, we'll have the men of mine, we'll have a short break, and then in part two, Anne will speak to her family's experience in Poland in World War II and the odyssey of her father in trying to move from a Soviet gulag to Anders' army to the RAF in Great Britain. Here's our disclaimer. The comments are those of myself and Anne, and not necessarily those of the Lexington veterans. Why this presentation? A member recommended that we should do a presentation on this book, the 303 Squadron. You can see it up there. It was a great suggestion, but in preparing the talk, I realized that it wasn't just about the 303 Squadron that made contributions to the Allied effort in World War II, but several Polish Armed Forces units distinguished themselves as well, and that those significant contributions had been overlooked for the past 80 years. Those contributions will be the subject of my talk. At the same time I was working on this presentation, I met Anne and realized that she was writing a book on her father's experience in World War II, and she graciously agreed to share her research with us. I'm very, very happy to have you. We hope that you will enjoy this presentation, and at the end, learn something new or remember something that you once knew. And then most of all, have appreciation for the contributions that Poland made to the Allied victory in World War II. I will be covering in my talk 1939 to 1945. By necessity, I can't include all the details, but be very happy to address any of you might know in the Q&A. Here's a map of Poland on the eve of the invasion. You can see it's surrounded by enemies. Hitler had already taken over Czechoslovakia. He had demanded Germany be given the Baltic port of Danzig, which is, I think you can see it right there. He had already signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which with Stalin would divide Poland as the spoils of their war. The Nazis invade Poland on September 1st, 1939. On September 3rd, Britain and France declare war on Germany, but they don't send any troops or equipment. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, and Poland was unprepared for a two-front war, and without support from France and the United Kingdom, realized it would soon be defeated. Consequently, the government issued orders that the armed forces should avoid capture and evacuate the country. The plan was to reconstitute the Polish forces abroad, and once reconstituted, they would resume the fight for their homeland. On September 28th, Warsaw surrendered, and on October 6th, about 35 days after the start of war, all formal resistance ended. Casualties, there were over 800,000 Poles killed, wounded, or captured, and nearly 100% of Poland's aircraft and tanks had been destroyed. At this point, Poland could not remain on the battlefield. However, it would continue the fight. After the fall of Poland, the government and armed forces regrouped abroad. The government in exile evacuated to Paris. There it was recognized as the legitimate government of Poland. Though the government had relocated, resistance to the Nazis continued through the Polish resistance, consisting of the underground state and the home army. The Polish underground state provided social, education, and legal services, as well as aid to victims of Nazi atrocities. Through its council to aid Jews, it provided thousands of false identity papers. The home army was the military wing of the Polish underground and led the struggle to regain the Republic of Poland's sovereignty and independence. It was responsible for attacks on German forces, assassinations, and sabotage. It provided crucial intelligence, especially on the German V1 and V2 rocket development, as well as on German troop movements. With over 400,000 members, it was considered the largest resistance force in Europe. It's estimated that its actions diverted several Nazi divisions from the battlefield to guard against the home army's clandestine operations. In this slide, you'll see a number of evacuation routes. The armed forces sought the routes out of Poland to reconstitute in the West. The arrows are just the general direction of the evacuation routes. Travel was on foot, wagon, train, ship, any and all means available. The travel was extremely difficult, with thousands dying of disease and malnutrition on the way. Despite the hardships and dangers, the Poles persisted, believing that reaching the West and fighting alongside the Allies would enable them to recover their homeland. By 1940, over 80,000 Polish forces had reached France and were forming Polish units under the direction of the government in exile. In general, the Polish capacity to organize units exceeded the capacity of the French to equip them. Approximately 230 pilots and maybe 500 ground crew participated in air operations, shooting down somewhere between 51 and 57 aircraft. One fighter squadron was fully formed and equipped, and other pilots were assigned piecemeal to replacements on individual French squadrons. For the Army, 4 divisions and 2 separate brigades were formed, but only one division was fully equipped. And that division provided an armor brigade to assist in the retreat of French forces. The results, about 55,000 Polish troops fought for France during the 6-week war. About 1,400 were killed in action, but about 35,000 made it across the Channel to regroup in Great Britain. The forces that evacuated from Poland and France formed the base for reorganizing Polish armed forces. These forces fought in the major campaigns of North Africa, Italy, the Normandy breakout, and the Netherlands. In addition, the Polish resistance provided vital intelligence across Europe. This next section will discuss how the reconstituted various branches of the Polish army aided the Allies and fought against the Nazis. The first units organized and deployed by Great Britain were the fighter pilots. The battle for Britain had been waging since early July, and Britain was losing more pilots faster than it could replace them. The Polish pilots who had flown against the Germans in Poland and France had combat experience, and once trained on the British fighters, they performed exceptionally well. The 303 Squadron, which was the genesis of this talk, was the most successful fighter unit in the Battle of Britain, having shot down 126 aircraft in 42 days. Here's a quote from the British Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding. Had it not been for the magnificent material contributed by the Polish squadrons and their unsurpassed gallantry, I hesitate to say that the outcome of the battle would have been the same. After the Battle of Britain, the fighter squadrons served in all Royal Air Force commands until the end of the war. Early on, the pilots flew the Hawker Hurricane on the left, and then as the war progressed and technology improved, they transitioned to the Supermarine Spitfire. The Polish checkerboard, right, sorry about that. In the upper left corner was the symbol of the Polish Air Force. It was adopted after World War I as an easily recognizable symbol, and I think you can see it, if I can control this, right there and right there. So it's on the Polish piloted aircraft. Polish pilots also flew in the Bomber Command. Bomber pilots are critical for the sustained strategic bombing of Germany. Polish crews manned 5 squadrons and flew several different types of bombers. Bomber Command suffered one of the highest attrition rates of any Allied unit in World War II. Roughly 46% of Bomber Command aircrews were killed, with a total casualty rate of killed, wounded, missing, or prisoners of war about 59%. Here you'll see a photo. This is a Armstrong Wellington bomber of the 304 Squadron, one of the bomber squadrons. This is the aircraft that was flown early on. And then here's a picture of one of the number 305 Squadron. And if you remember that 46% was the attrition, the casualty rate, probably half the people shown in this picture weren't alive at the end of the war. This is a picture of the Polish Air Force Memorial at the Royal Air Force Base in Northolt, citing that about 18,000 men and women served in the Polish men and women served in the Air Force, the Royal Air Force, and about 2,000 died. The Polish Navy, well, not large, fought extensively throughout the entire war. It operated in very close cooperation with the Royal Navy. Its major battles included the Dunkirk evacuation, sinking the Bismarck, and the D-Day landings. It conducted 787 convoy escorts and over 1,000 patrols. What we don't know is how many British or Allied ships were saved by the patrols that the Polish Navy sailed. Polish Army in the West. Polish Army in the West was fought in North Africa, which was the defense of Tobruk, in the Italian campaign at Monte Cassino, Ancona, and Bologna, and continued to fight through the liberation of France and the Netherlands. At its peak, the army was about 170,000. It consisted of 4 primary units. 2 were corps and 2 were separate brigades. And I want to talk next about a little bit about in detail about each of those units. The Independent Carpathian Brigade was one of the first units formed from the Polish troops fleeing through the Balkans. The map indicates a route to the French-controlled Syria, where they trained initially. Again, they were allies of France, or expecting allies of France, Romania, through which they could leave the country, the port of Constanta, and get down into initially in home Syria, which was an ally of the French, or a French protectorate at the time. After training there for a while, when the French surrendered, the brigade defied the demand from the French that they surrender as well, and they evacuated British-controlled Palestine to continue the war. Under British command, it moved to Port Said in Egypt, and then on to Tobruk. Tobruk was a deep water port that the Germans wanted for the resupply of their North Africa Corps in its campaign to seize the Suez Canal. They were going to fight across North Africa and seize the Middle East oil fields. The brigade, with a coalition of Allied units, became known as the Tobruk Rats, and they successfully defended Tobruk through November 1941. As an aside, there's a different operation, and you might hear that Tobruk fell to the Germans in 1942, and that is correct. That's not engaged here, but they do eventually lose Tobruk. In March of 42, the brigade was called back to Palestine, where it joined the British or the Polish forces of Anders' army. All right. Anders' army, General Anders had been imprisoned in Moscow's Lubyanka prison, but when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Polish government in exile was able to convince Stalin to release Anders and many of the Polish prisoners of war that were imprisoned in Soviet gulags. Anders was to form an army that would fight against the Germans. Initially, Stalin released about 40,000 prisoners of war to join the Anders army. This map shows the odyssey of the Anders army. And first, the initial training site was Buzalip. You can see it right there. And it was located there because it was thought to be one of the closest locations to the POWs that were leaving the Soviet gulags. It also had some abandoned buildings there that they could use as a headquarters. However, the area was too cold. They received no equipment from the Soviets. They had very little food, and they had no officers. So it didn't make a lot of sense to stay there. And in January 42, Anders takes his army and moves them down here to Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Tashkent is warmer, but still no food, no equipment, no officers. They continued to train, but they weren't anywhere near a fighting force. And that move itself was roughly 2,000 kilometers. Churchill then convinced Stalin that Anders' army would be better supported and utilized if the army was securing the Persian corridor used for Lend-Lease supplies from the US to the USSR. Not a topic here, but this the Lend-Lease route came kind of up like this and went that into Russia. No evidence that Anders really secured that corridor, but it was a good way for them to get out from under, or to at least get equipment from the British. Stalin conceded, and Anders moved his army in March and August across the Caspian Sea into British-run Palestine. One of the key things about this is that in addition to leaving the Tashkent, Anders was able to take almost 40,000 Polish civilians with him and get them, in better conditions. So it was not only did he take about 80,000 troops, but he brought a lot of Polish civilians with him as well. Anders' army arrived in Palestine in late 1942. In late 1942, and was placed under joint Soviet-British control. I'm very sorry about this. But all was not well, even though they made it to Palestine. In April of 1943, the Nazis reported the discovery of mass graves in the Katyn Forest, which is up here near the town of Smolensk. The result of that was that Stalin, or that Anders had to separate from any relationship at all with the Soviets. Stalin had hoped that he could eliminate any British or any Polish intellectuals that might oppose him in a post-war settlement. And the estimation, he killed about 22,000 people, or 22,000 Polish officers, any intelligentsia, any government officials still in the country, about 22,000. So under British control, Anders' army, about 62,000, deployed to Italy in December of 1943 and became part of the British Eighth Army. As part of a larger offensive, the Polish II Corps was tasked with capturing the fortified Monte Cassino monastery to break the German Gustav line and open the Allied advance to Rome. The assault on Monte Cassino began in May. I'm sorry about that. The assault on Monte Cassino began in May, and after fierce fighting, the abbey was seized on May 18th. Of note is that this had been the Allies' fourth attempt to capture Monte Cassino, and they succeeded using the Polish Anders' army as the main force. It was one of the most brutal battles of the Italian campaign. Here is the recognition that King George gave to Anders' army. If it had been given to me to choose the soldiers to command, I would have chosen the Poles. So here's Anders' army in Italy. Following Monte Cassino, Anders' army, the Polish II Corps, continued fighting up the Italian Adriatic coast, capturing the port of Ancona, and leading the April 1945 liberation of Bologna, a major transportation hub. So I think you can see those here. He comes to Italy, Monte Cassino, Ancona in July of 44, and then Bologna in April of 45. After the capture of Bologna, the II Corps remained on occupation duty in Italy until disbanded in 1946. British historian H.P. Wilmot wrote, "In the Allied camp, the Poles are probably unequal in their willingness and determination to close quarters with the enemy." The third of the four primary units of the Polish forces in the West was the Polish First Corps. It was formed in Scotland in 1940 using soldiers who fled after the fall of France. It was primarily an administrative and training unit. However, the Polish First Corps deployed two units into combat with British forces, the Polish First Armored Division and the Polish Independent Parachute Brigade. The Polish First Armored Division, with over 16,000 troops and 4,000 vehicles, deployed from the United Kingdom to France in August of 44, attached to the Canadian Army. It entered combat on August 8th. It was critical in sealing the Falaise pocket here, and then continued up along the German coast or into Germany, along the French coast in Germany, and through the Netherlands. It seized the communications hub at Breda, and then went on and seized the German naval base in Wilhelmshaven. What's important about the Breda operation is Breda was a historic city, and the people were afraid that this is a Dutch city, afraid that they would be demolished in artillery and bombing. And the First Armored Division, through maneuver, was able to avoid suppressing artillery fire and actually captured the city with very little loss of civilian life and very little damage to the historic buildings. The General Mazik, who who ran the First Armored Division, is honored with a statue in the town for the work that they did. So the Polish First Independent Parachute Brigade, what's important about this really is that this brigade was designed to jump into Poland and help lead the liberation of Poland. However, the British pressured the government in exile to use the parachute brigade to help in their Operation Market Garden. You can see in this diagram here, this is Market Garden, where airborne units, these two are US units, the 101st and the 82nd, they would jump in, seize river crossings, and a tank corps would drive up this one road and seize the Rhine River crossing at Arnhem. The consequence of that would be you'd make a turn to the west, a turn to the east, and you'd bypass all the German fortifications and probably end the war by Christmas of 44. That was the plan, did not go according to plan. During the week of fighting that the Poles suffered extremely heavy casualties. Actually, all the airborne units up in this direction, the Polish First Airborne Division suffered very heavy casualties. Weather and transportation did not work out in their behalf. It liberated parts of the Netherlands, but was considered a failure. The British First Airborne Division suffered 80% casualties. That's 80% rendered combat ineffective. It went in with about 10,000 troops, and roughly 2,000 troops came out. And the casualties mean killed, wounded, missing, taken prisoner. Polish General Sobieski had opposed the operation from the start because it was poorly planned and was very risky, very ambitious. However, after the campaign, he was scapegoated and relieved of his command. The last unit to look at here is Berling's army, and this shouldn't be confused with any forces fighting for the West. This was created in 43 and 44 from Polish citizens who supported the communists. At its peak, it was about 330,000 people, and it fought with the Soviet army, the Red Army, to Berlin. After the war, its primary role was really to suppress the emergence of any pro-Western government. It served as the foundation for armed forces of the new Polish People's Republic. Post-war, the Polish armed forces fighting the Western Allies felt betrayed. They had fought valiantly alongside the Allies to defeat Germany with the expectation that they would return to a free Poland or at least be allowed to fight for it. The likelihood of imprisonment or execution by the new Soviet-backed communist government installed in Poland prevented many from returning to Poland. Most of the people in Anders' army were considered traitors and would have been, at least the officers, executed if they had gone back. And so you see a large number of Polish people who had to be resettled in the United Kingdom. This map indicates, you can see the outline in black is the new Poland, outlined in yellow is the Poland pre-war in 1939. Poland lost 6 million, up to 6 million people, 5.6 to 6 million people, but 17% of its pre-war population. For reference, France lost about 1.44%, and Britain lost just under 1%. So their contribution was exceptional, from the 303 Fighter Squadron in the Battle of Britain to sacrifices of the Bomber Squadron, to fierce fighting at Monte Cassino, the liberation of Breda, and the clandestine operations of the full army. The Polish forces fought with courage and distinction. This concludes my portion. We're going to take a quick break while Ann sets up her slides. Thank you very much for listening.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Linda.
It's good to be back. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. My goodness, you wait until you learn about this family history. It's going to be quite wonderful. So, our next speaker is Ann Hardt Williams, who is a writer, a researcher, and a historian. She writes under the pen name Hannah Hardt. Now, I confess I haven't read any of her material because I've only just recently met her. But I imagine after you see this presentation, probably going to want to run right out and buy one of her books. Now, Ann is the daughter of two veterans of the Second World War, Lieutenant Zbigniew Roman Hardt, a Polish pilot in the British Royal Air Force, the very British Royal Air Force that Bruce was talking about. He is from Polish Lvov and today's Lviv, Ukraine. That's where he's from. And she's also the daughter of Lieutenant Elizabeth Stadmiller Hardt from Akron, Ohio, a United States Navy nurse at Base Hospital number 18 in Guam. Now you may ask, how did a Polish pilot meet a Navy nurse? Well, the answer is they met after the war. Now, Ann is going to discuss her search for her Polish family's World War II history based on her grandmother's secret diary, first-person accounts, secondary sources, and research conducted in the archives of Poland, Ukraine, Germany, and Great Britain. And as you know from what Bruce already said, this partnership between Bruce and Ann was just a happy accident. They were talking after church with coffee one day, and they discovered that Ann's father happened to be one of the brave soldiers turned pilots in Bruce's presentation. So, perfect opportunity to get together and do a double presentation. We want to thank Ann not only for her professional research, but Ann's husband, Chet, because as you will see this unfold, it's a fantastic video production. So you're going to love it. And we're going to learn the story of this pilot at a level of detail you just don't often get a chance to see. So with that, please welcome Ann Williams.
Thank you very much, Linda. As a family historian, I search for old family photographs, letters, telegrams, diaries, holy cards, report cards, military records, and more. Precious keepsakes from a past generation that tell a story. As a writer, I have looked for themes in my family stories from the Second World War. I have found many: courage, bravery, resilience, survival, and perhaps most of all, community. Hardt family members who survived the war did so due to the aid and assistance of a community of strangers, compatriots, neighbors, friends, and relatives. In this presentation, War the Enemy of Smiles, we will encounter these themes as we follow the 35,913-mile wartime journey of my father, Zbigniew Hardt. As a prisoner in Lvov, Poland, and the gulags of Siberia, then as a soldier in General Władysław Ander's Polish army in Russia, Iran, and Iraq, and finally in England, where he became a pilot in the British Royal Air Force. Our story begins with my father, Zbigniew Roman Hardt, or Zbyszek for short, He grew up during the Polish Second Republic, the 20-year period between the First and Second World Wars. He was born and raised in the city of Lwów, the third largest city in Poland, also referred to as the Vienna of the East. My grandfather Stanisław was a lawyer and banker. He was chief legal counsel and secretary director of the Bank of Land Credits. Grandmother Adela was an elementary school teacher who became a real estate developer after she won the Polish lottery in 1928 and again in 1932. Stanisław and Adela had 4 children, all of whom studied in Lwów and attended Mass at Mary Magdalena Catholic Church. Eldest son Bolesław, or Bolek, was a student at the International Trade University. Zbyszek, son number 2, attended the Józef Pilsudski Cadet Academy from the age of 13 to 18. Janusz, or Jan, was a prankster who attended private high school. He desperately wanted to go to the Cadet Academy, but he was rejected because he wore glasses and he was left-handed. Rita attended the Sacred Heart Academy. During the Second World War, Sacred Heart nuns also hid Jewish children and families from the Nazis in their convent. Lwów was located in the southeastern corner of Poland, bordering Russia, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. It was a cosmopolitan city and an international center for finance, commerce, trade, and served as a major railroad hub. The Grand Opera House was the center of Polish culture and politics, and where Adela's sister, Lucyna, performed as an opera singer. Lwów universities were renowned throughout Europe for their graduate programs in law, medicine, and mathematics. In 1939, Lwów's population was 330,000, with the majority being Polish Catholic, 1/3 were Polish Jewish. Ukrainians were the next largest minority group, followed by Armenians, Austrians, Germans, Scots, Turks, and Tartars. In the surrounding countryside, most of the farmers were Ukrainian. The Hardt family originally came from the Hardt Mountain region of southern Germany. So how did the Hardt family end up in Poland? In 1870, Napoleon III declared war on Prussia's King Wilhelm I, and the Franco-Prussian War began. That is when my great-great-grandfather, Mateusz Hardt, took his 5 sons and immigrated to Poland so they would not be conscripted into the Prussian army. During the early 20th century, Hardt family members were devoted supporters of this man, Józef Pilsudski. He was considered the de facto leader of the Second Polish Republic as the Minister of Military Affairs. My grandfather Stanisław served under Pilsudski during the 1920 Russo-Polish War, which stopped Vladimir Lenin from spreading communism throughout Europe. Pilsudski was widely recognized for his opposition to anti-Semitism and for his state policies of inclusion, that citizens be judged not by their ethnicity or religion, but by their loyalty to Poland. After Pilsudski died in 1935, anti-Semitism in Poland increased significantly. Here is the Hardt family attending the funeral of Józef Pilsudski in Krakow at Wawel Castle Cathedral. An important center of Hardt family business activity was the Miękkinia Stone Mining Company located in the village of Miękkinia near Krakow. The Miękkinia Stone Mine employed 1,200 workers and was well known for its pinkish cobblestones made from volcanic porphyr rock. Stanisław's younger brother Edmund Hardt was president of the company. Their brother-in-law, Rudolf Tegel, was the technical director. Fluent in 5 languages, the Czech-born Tegel married the eldest Hardt sister, Amalia. Every year, Hardt family reunions were held in Miękkinia. In these reunion photos, you will see the smiling faces of the men and boys in this close-knit Catholic family. Many would soon lose their lives in the Battle of Kutno, the Katyn massacre, the Lviv massacre, Auschwitz, Belzec, and Mauthausen. We have a short film clip of pre-war Kenya from the Archdiocese of Krakow Film Archive. Here you will see rare footage of the quarrymen at work. During World War II, the mine was taken over by the Nazis, who used its stones to repair roads, bridges, and buildings. Under the Reich, quarry workers became resistance fighters and members of the Polish Home Army, who smuggled dynamite from the mine and used it to eliminate Nazi targets in the region. My father, Zbyszek, was 18 years old when on September 1st, 1939, Adolf Hitler mounted a blitzkrieg attack on Poland. Soon Lviv came under constant aerial bombardment from the Luftwaffe that targeted the main railroad station, airport, prominent buildings, churches, hospitals, and water and power plants. On the ground, Polish armed forces fought German motorized units and pushed them back into retreat. But the Germans regrouped and began to encircle the city. Zbyszek was given a motorcycle and ordered on reconnaissance missions. He reported back to Central Command that both the German and the Russian armies were on the offensive in Lviv. On September 17th, the Red Army entered Lviv. Polish forces were told not to oppose the Russians, who claimed they came to help the Poles to combat the German invaders. This was, of course, a complete falsehood because Russia and Germany signed a secret pact in which the two aggressor nations annexed Poland between them. On September 22nd, Lviv surrendered to the Red Army. Agreements were made that all Polish officers would leave and go to whichever country accepted them. However, before noon that day, the NKVD, Soviet secret police, began to arrest all the Polish officers, including two of my great-uncles, who were then sent to prisoner of war camps. In 1940, they were executed along with 22,000 other officers and intelligentsia by the NKVD on Joseph Stalin's orders in what became known as the Katyn massacre. After the surrender, Stanisław and Adela made plans for their family to leave Lviv. Scared their 21-year-old son, Bolik, would be conscripted into the Red Army, They hired a guide and smuggled him out of Russian territory to Nazi-occupied Minkinia. Zbyszek and Janos went to a nearby local high school and waited to get smuggled out too. On October 22nd, Russian authorities held a plebiscite to determine if the local population wanted to be incorporated into the Soviet Union. On voting day, armed soldiers brought people to the voting offices. The ballot had a list of candidates and one checkbox with the word yes. It was soon announced that 99% of the citizens of Lvov wanted to become part of Russia. 2 days later, on October 25th, just after midnight, the NKVD, armed with rifles, arrested Stanislav Hardt at home, in his apartment, in front of his crying wife Adela, and their children, Zbyszek, Janos, and Rita. Stanislav was incarcerated at Zamarstynov, an NKVD interrogation prison, and was never seen again. 2 weeks later, at midnight, NKVD soldiers arrested Zbyszek. He was dragged downstairs, pushed into a crowded truck, then thrown into a cold dungeon at Zamarstynov. While there, he turned 19. Here, he talks about his interrogation.
I was interrogated and tortured by NKVD for 5.5 months. They wanted to know what I knew about my friends in Polish underground. I never gave them any names. They beat me unconscious many times and tried to force me to sign a false confession saying I belonged to any anti-communist organization. I refused to sign.
On Easter weekend in March 1940, Zbyszek was removed from prison and taken to the Hotel Krakow for a 3-day political trial, the trial of 16 cadets. The last day of the trial, grandmother Adela wrote this about Zbyszek in her secret diary.
At last, in the afternoon, after excruciating anxiety, we mothers learned the horror. 2 death sentences for Captains Krotovil and Tobruk. 8 cadets were sentenced to 15 years, 6 for 10 years. My Zbyszek was accused of knowing everything, but failed to denounce his friends to the authorities. The door opened. I see Zbyszek. He's staring at the floor. 5 fingers are spread across his face, meaning 5 years. I see the most terrible pain in his eyes, reflecting the sorrow of his lost freedom. His pain, sobbing, howling, wrenched my heart. The cadets left at 9 in the evening. Masses of people gathered at the gate. I called out to my Zbyszek, my little child, but he didn't wince or turn around. Knew there would be consequence.
From the trial, Zbyszek was taken to Brigitki prison in Lvov. For years, my father never spoke about what happened there. But in 1992, 1 year after Ukraine gained its independence from Russia, we went on a father-daughter trip to Lviv, Ukraine. My father had not been back to his home city in 53 years. While walking around Brigitki prison, his smile disappeared, and he finally told me what took place during his incarceration. In his own words.
After the trial, I was transferred to Brigitki prison in Lvov and thrown into a large cell together with the trial cadets and 80 other prisoners. There was an atmosphere of terror. Hardened criminals, murderers, rapists, thieves ruled the cell. Their leader was a self-appointed criminal called a Starosta, who was well connected with the prison guards. The rest of us were political prisoners, cadets, and Polish leading citizens arrested by NKVD. Early on, the Starosta started to bully me. He ordered me on a double shift emptying latrine buckets. I refused, and he hit me. I punched him in the face, and his nose was bleeding badly. The cell divided between the cadets and the criminals, and a huge fight broke out. Guards swarmed the cell. They put me in a basement cell the size of a coffin called the icebox. After 5 days, I blacked out and ended up in the prison infirmary. From then on, I was put in a cell with no criminals I was incarcerated in Brigitki prison for 7 months.
After Zbyszek's trial, grandmother Adela went into hiding. The Polish underground warned her the NKVD had targeted her for deportation to Kazakhstan. Between February 1940 and June 1941, the Soviet government deported an estimated 1.5 million Polish citizens from eastern Poland. Whole families were taken from their homes in the middle of the night, herded into freezing, overcrowded cattle cars, and shipped to Siberia and Asia. To avoid capture, Adela took 10-year-old Rita and hid in safe houses, abandoned apartments, and the Institute for the Blind. In one close call, Adela was saved from arrest after being warned by her Jewish neighbors. On April 13, 1940, the date of the third deportation, Adela wrote this in her secret diary.
Evening, it's 5 minutes to 10. Panic is embracing me. I am waking up Rita, and I don't know where to go. For a month, we are hiding from ruffians. We will go to a shelter. We are running, cold, in rain, with snow. We are not welcome. There's no room. I am asking to sleep even in the kitchen, so we make a bed. I wake up early to pray at Mary Magdalene Church. On the way, there are strange movements of trust. People are crying and shouting. Pani Muzhinska is sitting in a truck with Bolshevik guards. I realize this is deportation. I am running to my place in Nowy Świat Street, rushing into the house, like always, for breakfast. And there my neighbor, Jewish dentist Steinberg, and his wife are shouting at me. Mrs. Dr. Hardt, run away. They came twice for you, and so the superintendent of the building won't see you. Grab laundry from the salon and run away.
2 weeks later, Adela and Rita escaped from Soviet-occupied Lvov. In her diary, Adela describes a network of Jewish document forgers, guides, drivers, and safe house operators who risked their lives to help them. In Nazi-occupied Minkina, they joined the resistance with other Hardt family members. Adela, Rita, Janos, Bolek, and several cousins lived with Rudolf Tegel and Amalia. For a year and a half, my family hid 2 more people in the Tegel house overlooking the quarry, a Jewish mother, Stefania Wierzbicka, and her 8-year-old daughter, Bronia. They were discovered by the Gestapo, arrested, and never seen again. Back in Lvov, on October 30th, guards took Zbyszek and the Polish cadets to the railroad station, where thousands of Polish prisoners were herded into cattle cars. They were first taken to a prison in Kiev for 1 week, then to a prison in Kharkov for 5 months, where Zbyszek turned 20. In March 1941, Zbyszek was separated from his cadet friends, taken to the train station, and shoved into a Russian Stolypin boxcar with criminals. After a brief stop in Moscow, they began a 42-day, 6,275-mile journey on the Trans-Siberian Railroad across Asia. In April, Zbyszek arrived at Bukhty-Nahotka transit camp with barbed wire fencing, watchtowers with floodlights, and Russian soldiers with guard dogs. There were over 5,000 people in this camp. It was there that Zbyszek first encountered dangerous gangs of Russian career criminals called Urkas. Fortunately, he found police captain Pavel Zalewski and a group of Polish police from Lvov, and they stayed together for protection. May 8th, 1941, when the ice in the Sea of Japan had sufficiently melted, Zbyszek and thousands of Polish prisoners were put on NKVD Gulag ship Minsk. Here, Zbyszek describes the depravity he witnessed on that ship.
On May 8th, 1941, I was put on NKVD Gulag ship Minsk with thousands of prisoners from the transit camp. We were all locked below deck in the hold. It took 1 week to reach Magadan, Russia, in the Arctic Circle. 7 days of hell, the worst days of my life. There was little food or water. Dozens of Polish people died. Those at the very bottom of the ship were smashed to death by the weight of prisoners above them. At night, Gangs of Urkhas attacked and killed political prisoners to get their food. No guards even came to stop them. Many political prisoners suffocated to death because there was almost no ventilation. I climbed up at the side of the ship and put my nose near small cracks in the ceiling to breathe air. When we reached Magadan, I passed out. A medic found me at the beach in a pile of dead bodies and brought me to the primitive log cabin prison hospital.
At Magadan Prison Hospital, Zbyszek was brought back to health by Dr. Levitsky, a Russian Jewish doctor and convicted counter-revolutionary serving a 5-year sentence. When well enough, Zbyszek volunteered as his medic. When 2 weeks later, the NKVD transferred Zbyszek to Magadan Gulag Quarry, a quarry that supplied stone for the construction of the Magadan-Palatka Railroad. Zbyszek worked at the quarry in June and July 1941. There were no Urkhas at this gulag. Dr. Levitsky also worked at the Gulag Quarry Infirmary several days a week and got permission for Zbyszek to be his medic. This meant Zbyszek was excused from hard labor a few days a week. On one non-clinic day, Zbyszek was called to the infirmary. The Russian commandant of the quarry had syphilis and demanded Zbyszek drain the lesion. The procedure was successful, but the next day, Zbyszek was put on a truck and taken to Gulag Duchka in Magadan. Gulag Duchka was the oldest state farm in Siberia. It was the primary supplier of food for the population of Magadan. For 1 month, Zbyszek harvested cabbage for 16 hours a day. Men and women both worked here. No one was safe. Gangs of Urkhas imposed a brutal system of robbery, beatings, rapes, and murders. Zbyszek got into a fight with an Urkha to protect a woman from being raped in the cabbage field. The next day, he was reassigned to the Ivanova Brigade to cut high grass in the Kolyma River tributary 300 kilometers north. For 6 days, the brigade rode horseback along the riverbank. On the way, each of the 12 men in the brigade were left at a different campsite. Zbyszek was dropped off at the furthest camp with the horse he rode. He was given a sickle, 2 loaves of bread, and twine. A barge came every 2 weeks to pick up hay bales and left twine and bread. Close by, there was a small settlement of peaceful, Tungus-speaking indigenous reindeer people. Zbyszek observed the Evenkis and learned how to catch sturgeon, track game meat, and deter Siberian brown bears. October 10th, 1941, a boat worker told Zbyszek that amnesty had been granted to Polish citizens in the USSR. He rode his horse back to Magadan, and there he found thousands of Polish survivors of the gulags. On October 16th, Zbyszek and the other Polish survivors left Magadan on NKVD ship Delstroy. In Vladivostok, Zbyszek enlisted in the Polish army. He was given identification papers and 380 rubles and was instructed to travel to Tashkent, Uzbekistan. For the first time in 2 years, Zbyszek was no longer a prisoner. In February 1942, he reached the Polish Army headquarters in Tashkent and turned 21. He became a soldier in the 7th Infantry Division. The commander of the Polish Army in Russia was this man, General Vladislav Anders. Early in the war, he was captured by the Soviets and imprisoned in Lubyanka prison in Moscow, but was released after the amnesty agreement. In Tashkent, when General Anders inspected his troops, there were 79,000 soldiers and 37,000 civilians, but thousands of Polish officers were missing. General Anders began an intensive search for them. He questioned Russian commanders and political leaders, including Joseph Stalin, who claimed not to know anything about the 22,000 Polish officers murdered in the Katyn massacre. In March, Zbyszek was assigned to an officer program for 5 months in Karasu, Kyrgyzstan, to train on Russian artillery equipment and guns. Here he is training with fellow soldiers and visiting local tribal leaders. In August, Zbyszek and the men in the officer program were ordered to evacuate Russia. Winston Churchill wanted the Polish forces under British command in the Middle East, and Joseph Stalin agreed. By train, they traveled to the port of Krasnoyarsk in Turkmenistan. There, they boarded a Russian oil tanker crowded with thousands of Polish evacuees and crossed the Caspian Sea. August 15th, Zbyszek arrived in Pahlavi, Iran. His nightmare in the so-called Soviet paradise was finally over. A few days later, he was transported by truck in a large caravan through the Talish Mountains, the desert of Iran to Tehran, then through the dangerous Kum Mountains to Kanakwin, Iraq. In Kanakwin, the Polish army divisions regrouped and trained on British military equipment. Zbyszek trained on 50 caliber Browning machine guns attached to the back of Lend-Lease American Ford Jeeps. In nearby Kizil-Ribat, he learned to operate British trucks and tanks. Winston Churchill wanted 3,500 Polish soldiers from the Anders Army to train as pilots for the British Royal Air Force, and Zbyszek was selected. If he had not been called to the RAF, he would have continued on with the Polish Second Corps and fought in the Italian campaign. Because the Mediterranean was teeming with German U-boats, the would-be pilots had to take a long and dangerous 4-month journey around Africa to reach England. November 24th, the group left Iran through the port of Basra and reached Karachi, Pakistan. Due to illness, Zbyszek stayed there for 2 months. On February 2nd, 1943, he boarded the city of Paris in Bombay and arrived in Durban, South Africa on February 23rd. 2 days later, he turned 22. March 1st, 1943, he boarded the HMS Empress of Canada with 1,800 other passengers, British, Polish, Canadian, Greeks, and 200 Italian prisoners of war. From Durban, Captain Gould sailed south, then west in a zigzag pattern northward up the Atlantic Ocean. On Saturday, March 13, 1943, at 11:56 p.m., the Leonardo da Vinci submarine torpedoed the Empress of Canada twice and sank the ship. Zbyszek swam in shark-infested waters for 18 hours before he was spotted by a Catalina plane from the British Gold Coast Guard. A small boat rescued him. Of the 400 people who died, 200 were Italian prisoners of war locked in the hold. The others perished in shark attacks. Survivors were taken to Freetown, Sierra Leone to recover. March 26th, the Polish Gulag survivors boarded the RMS Mauritania. 2 weeks later, they landed in Liverpool, England on April 9th. For the next 20 months, between April 1943 and November 1944, Zbyszek trained intensively as a fighter pilot. English lessons began immediately in Blackpool at the home of Mrs. Sweeney, where Zbyszek and his fellow pilot candidates were billeted. At RAF Fighter, he began flying on de Havilland Tiger Moth biplanes. Here he was issued a Polish Air Force identification card. At RAF Hucknall, he trained on Miles Magister planes. At RAF Newton, he learned advanced aerial warfare techniques on Miles Master II planes, also known as Baby Spitfires. In November 1944, he was awarded his coveted wings, his pilot wings. Polish pilots wore 2 insignias, the Polish Gappa, a Silver Eagle in flight, and an RAF British pilot badge. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, in the Pacific Theater, U.S. Navy nurse Elizabeth Stadmiller, the woman who would become my mother, was working in the orthopedic unit at Base Hospital 18 on the island of Guam. In Guam, Lieutenant Stadmiller tended hundreds of wounded soldiers during the bloodiest battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. She and my father would meet after the war was over. Back in England, on January 1st, 1945, Zbyszek Hardt was granted the title of pilot officer and was promoted to second lieutenant. He was posted to RAF Barrow-in-Furness on Walney Island in the Irish Sea. British Command requisitioned newly licensed Polish fighter pilots, Zbyszek among them, to fly target planes to train desperately needed student gunners as replacements on Allied bomber aircraft. In February, Zbyszek turned 24. As a target pilot, he simulated the evasive maneuvers of enemy planes. When piloting Miles Master II and Miles Marionette planes, the aircraft was manned with a soldier who released a canvas target attached to a 1,200-foot cable that gunners would shoot at for target practice. When flying a Spitfire, no towing targets were used. Pupil gunners would use camera guns to record their accuracy. After Victory Day on May 8th, 1945, Zbyszek never returned to Poland for fear of being rearrested by the NKVD. He stayed in England for 9 years. He continued to work for the RAF until 1948, then studied at Nottingham University in the chemistry program. On the last leg of Zbyszek's journey around the world in 1952, he sailed from Southampton, England on the MV Italia to Ellis Island. Before long, he came to Akron, Ohio, where he found work as a research and development chemist for BF Goodrich Tire and Rubber Company. He built a community of friends, colleagues, and neighbors who called him Ben because they could not pronounce Zbigniew or Zbyszek. Most importantly, he found the love of his life and married my mother, Elizabeth, the week before Valentine's Day in 1954. Soon they raised a family which grew to 7 children. In 1957, Ben Hardt became an American citizen, which he said was the greatest privilege of his life. Thank you. I think it's important that I mention a few people that were instrumental in putting this presentation together. I want to thank my cousin, Maciek Skulski from Poland. He's watching. It was very special to have him be the voice of my father, Zbyszek. Where is Misha? Misha, can you wave? Hi, Misha. Misha, thank you so much for being the voice of grandmother Adela. I want to thank my sister Mary Alice, who took close-ups from my parents' wedding album. She is on Zoom from Oklahoma, I think with her running group too. And my sister Trisha for the photos from our father's war album. She's on Zoom from Florida. And to my brother Mike, who is zooming in from New Zealand, for all the beautiful colorized photos in this presentation. Most of all, I want to thank my talented husband, Chet, for his graphics, sound, film editing, and technical expertise, and the moral support he has provided while I dragged him with me around the world to research my book in progress, War, the Enemy of Smiles, on which this presentation is based.
Thank you, Annie. We now have time for questions and answers. We ask that you speak into the microphone so that the Zoom audience can hear the question as well as the answer. Thank you.
Who wants to be first? I was right here.
You stay up here too.
So Anne,
Yes.
yeah.
Where? Oh, yes.
Wondering,
Keep it
have I got it close enough?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, Joyce.
yeah, I'm just wondering, how many people are kind of left in your family? I know it was some sisters and brother and, but a lot of cousins, I'm sure. And
Yes, yes. When I have still a very large family, and my mother's side of the family, she's one of 8 children. All of them had between 5 or more children. So we have a very large family that, yes, are very much part of our lives.
and where are they living, most of them?
You know, they're really spread around. I know, my brothers and sisters are certainly spread around quite a bit between, New York and Florida and Oklahoma, and still in Akron, Ohio. So yeah, they're spread around a bit.
And I know where one of your daughters.
Oh yeah,
Brussels.
oh yeah, my own daughter. Yes, she's in Brussels. Yes,
That's right.
yes. So she's also watching. Hello, Audrey.
Hello. Oh, that's great. Yeah, so you have an extended family, it sounds like.
Very much
And
so.
very supportive family.
They really
Yeah,
are.
thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank you, Joyce.
Takes it for you.
It's not lack of interest, it's like we're overwhelmed. You can hear me.
Oh, no, there were some hands that were going up, but there's also two of us, which makes it tougher to.
As a marvelous presentation, both presenters. I just wonder, can you comment on what it is about the people that you described? And maybe the Polish people of that era, and maybe today as well, what it is that about being Polish that might have contributed to the successful Odyssey that you both have described, and also what the role of Catholicism is in being Polish. Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
What I discovered was that there's this overriding desire to regain their country. I mean, if you went back into Polish history, you find that they were time and again, 3 different times were written off the map by the invading empires, the Russian, the Prussian, and the Austro-Hungarian empires. So after being reconstituted after World War I, and then losing again with the invasion by the Germans and the Soviets, they had this overriding desire that they were going to fight for their freedom. You know, they were not going to just let this happen. And that was, to decide, look, evacuate Poland, we got to reconstitute abroad, and we'll come back and fight. That was a hard decision to make, I'm sure, but that's the reason they did it. They knew they couldn't stay there and fight. They had to reconstitute abroad and then come back. And unfortunately, between the big 3, that was not to be. So
Yeah.
that's why.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Bruce said. And, from a personal standpoint, I know that as a cadet, young military person, my father was first and foremost wanting to fight to regain his country back. And I know that was foremost on his mind. But I think in terms of his resilience, I know that he told me that when he was exposed to communism in Russia, it made him become more of a believer in God, because he said that when he was in a country where there was no God, or you weren't allowed to have a God, that the for him, and he realized what religion was to him.
We have 2 questions on Zoom, so we're going to have Libby give us both of them, one after the other. Libby?
The first question asks how they can buy your book.
Okay, yes, I have gotten in trouble because I have about 3 chapters left, and someone from my high school in Ohio, Our Lady of the Elm, said, "Where is it? My father was in we're Polish, and my father was in World War II, and he wants to read your book." So I was like, okay, I'm getting it done. I'm working on it, and so soon, and I will announce it when I have it completely finished.
Great. The second question is, are there any of your dad's family still alive?
It's sad for me to answer that question, because my Aunt Rita, who gave me Grandmother Adela's diary, and I spent a summer with her with my children, and she would always say, "You tell the Americans what happened to Poland and what happened to our family." And I wish she was, well, maybe she's listening in right now, but she passed away just as the pandemic started. She may have when been one of the first people to contract it. So sad to see. And my father passed away, 20 years ago, and his brothers, my uncle Janusz around the same time, and my uncle Bolik, his brother, before that. So I don't have the exact date.
Okay, next question.
So you spoke about the rich community, pre-war life in Poland and how important community was. And then you described your father's odyssey through all these different places and people like that physician who kind of took him under his wing. And I'm sure there were many, many people along the way. He was one man of many trying to, escape and, fight for the cause. And I understand why, he had to make the decision to stay in Britain and then come to the US because returning home wasn't feasible. But is there a network of people? Did he have friends that reconnected after the war?
Yes, he was still very, very close with all of his cousins that survived and his brothers, and his Rita and Bolik were remained in Poland because they never could leave. So they were sort of trapped behind the Iron Curtain, as we would say. There were many, many relatives that were in Britain and Canada that we would visit. And so, yes, he kept in touch. There was a really still that close-knit family that continued after the war, missing, sadly.
And what about soldiers?
Yes, he was not necessarily involved in any particular organization that was related to the military, but there were a lot of other types of Polish organizations that were around the country, and he belonged to those.
I have a question for Bruce. This was when we were during the rehearsal. This struck me. My ignorance was just so palpable, and it's been with me for the past week.
Where'd I go?
We've had a glimpse of the suffering and the bravery and the courage of all of these young Polish soldiers, what they went through in order to fight for their country. And those who survived, when the war ended, all they wanted was to go back to their country and finally inhabit their country without anybody owning them. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. And I just thought maybe you could talk a little bit more about why they couldn't do it and what happened to those who did go back.
Okay.
It's absolutely horrendous.
I think we did mention that, anybody who fought for the West, the new, Polish Soviet-backed government, considered them traitors, and they were subject to either imprisonment or execution if they, a leader of any sort, they would be executed. So most of them chose not to go back. The UK, to its great credit, did establish a Polish resettlement corps, which was a training corps that gave the Poles up to 2 years of training in the language and in job skills so that they could resettle. And they would assist them if they didn't want to stay in the United Kingdom. They could go to Canada, they could go to Australia. They were very good about trying to help these people find a new home. So I think that was one of the positives of the end of the war and the fact that they could not go back to Poland. Mary?
I'm just curious.
Okay.
I'm just curious why he chose the United States. I mean, if it being in the United Kingdom, you'd think he would have gone to one of the other, either Canada or Australia, New Zealand.
Yes. His brother Janusz came over first, and so was encouraging him to come. And so he had at least one brother that was going to be in the United States. So that was his main reason.
Question for Bruce. How much of the territory of Poland before First World War has survived today?
I don't know what it is in kilometers or square miles. You know, when they made the division, I think roughly the same, it was based not so much on the territory itself as what was in the territories. For instance, the Port of Danzig and having access to the Baltic was really critical. But I just don't know what that territory, how it compares before and after what they lost to the Soviet Union, but what they gained from Germany. I'm sorry, I don't know that.
We have another Zoom question. Oh, Andrew, do you want to respond?
I'm sorry, what, can you repeat the
Territorial
question?
concessions, the relevant.
Oh, you mean how many kilometers?
Yeah.
in each
Often
one?
the borders of Poland have.
Yeah, they
changed
all,
over the wars.
yeah, they moved and left and, they went west. And so it was approximately the same amount of territory from before the war, except moved on, into German territory.
And we have another Zoom question.
So Patrice, I believe was named, said, "Thank you for this gripping presentation, Anne. One question. When Gestapo and Monika discovered and then murdered the two Jews, were there no repercussions for your family as the people who harbored them?"
Brania and Stefania, Stefania the mom and Brania the 8-year-old, I'll have this in the book. It's quite an extensive story, how they were found out. But at that time, they were hidden as a Polish maid and her daughter, and many of the commandants and German officials in the region had Polish servants, maids, and their children were also there. So because she had false papers and she was harbored under a false Catholic last name, they did not arrest anyone in the family, in my family, because there were other situations that were like that where commandants would find out that their maids were there under false names and they were also Jewish, so there weren't any repercussions.
You're kind of leaving out the closeness of your.
I mean, this question for Bruce, you mentioned the naval units. Were these units that escaped from Poland with their ships and complement, or were these people that survived these incredible overland journeys? And then
Really good,
reconstituted in British
really
ships?
good question. So what happens in 1939, so the Polish Navy is small, about 9 ships before the start of the war. And 4 of those are destroyers. So what happens is that the powers to be realize the German Navy is going to sink us. So they agree with the British to take 3 of the 4 destroyers, and they sail to the UK before the invasion of Poland. And those 3 ships are used, they do get damaged and they don't survive the entire war, but those 3 ships do become part of the Royal Navy. The rest of the ships, the Polish Navy actually grows during the war. These are ship transfers from the British. Supposedly the Polish were gonna pay for them, but they did not have to. That wasn't impressed on them. And then the crews for these ships were all Polish citizens, and they came either from escaped prisoners, they came from any of the refugees, they came from expats who might be living or already living in the UK or living in France or something like that. So they start the war with 1,000 sailors, end up with 4,000, and that difference in 3,000, there's certainly people who die, but the difference is made up of escaped people as well as expats or anybody who has Polish citizenship and wants to join the Navy and fight for the country. So is that okay?
another question.
I've already asked.
Go first and then. Did someone?
To what extent is this history that you talk about, part of the education of Polish school children today?
Hold the mic up, hold the mic up.
To what extent, is the history that you just described part of the education that Polish kids get today?
I would probably have to ask my relatives in Poland who are listening, because after the war, all of this history could not be discussed when Poland was under Soviet occupation. So when Poland became an independent country, then all of these stories started to come out. And when they became part of the curriculum, I'm not certain, but I can find out and get back to you.
Bill.
Turn this on.
No, it's not.
I'm so impressed with the
bravery and patriotism and fighting spirit of the Poles in World War II. It kind of reminds me of the Ukrainians today. And the question in my mind is how unique was Poland in this regard compared to other Eastern European countries? You may not know the answer to that, but about Romania or Czechoslovakia or Ukraine in World War II.
Do you want to tackle that one?
Good, I think the thing that makes Poland unique is in the sense that it had been partitioned. This was the fourth partition, where it was erased from the map. And so I think it's trying to reconstitute itself, which makes this case somewhat unique from the rest of Eastern Europe. Now, Vichy, I don't know if you want to talk about Czechoslovakia, but that might be a comparison where Czechoslovakia is somewhat sliced and diced. So maybe there's a comparison there, but I don't really know. But I'm quite certain what makes Poland unique in this regard is the number of times it more or less was disappeared from the map. So sorry about that.
I can respond a little bit that Czechoslovakia got taken by the Germans very early in the war, in this particular war. So they lost their identity there. And Czechoslovakia is landlocked, which makes it different. They didn't have Danzig to go to. So it's a different situation.
I guess like Linda, I'm dismayed about how little I knew about all of this. And I consider myself a lover of history, and I read a lot of historical novels and so forth. Unfortunately, a lot of times we learn these stories and they become popular through film. Private Ryan and so forth, people finally understood about D-Day and so forth. And I'm wondering whether any Polish directors or Polish film artists have made films about Poland to try to put it more on the map about the history, because this is fascinating. Thank both of you for this. It was really terrific.
Do you want to talk about
I
Polish
want to
film?
address something in regarding films, not a Polish film, but many of you are familiar with The Imitation Game, right? The movie about Alan Turing and the development of breaking the German Enigma code. Part of the history that's forgotten about that is that there's a Polish mathematician in 1932 who figures out how to break this code. He's a mathematician and he notices patterns in the German in the Enigma code. He develops with other mathematicians of Poland, they developed this machine called the Bomba. It is capable of breaking the code. Essentially, they exploit a weakness in how the Germans code operates. And that's very few people know that. Now, I don't want to take anything away from Alan Turing, because the British intelligence did an excellent job in breaking the more, as war progresses and technology changes and things change, and they developed a better system when the Nazis went to a 4-rotor code, Enigma code. Turing and his group were, I think the second person's name is Gordon Welchman. Those are the two principal British intelligence people who who break that code. But if you watch The Imitation Game, and that's a great movie, it's really good to see. You don't really get anybody else's contribution to that but the British. And the estimate is that the work that the Poles had done probably shortened the war by 2 years. And if you figure that 2 to 3 million people from 1939 to 1945 are dying in this war in Europe, I'm only talking Europe now, they may have saved 4 to 6 million people. But we don't know that history. So the other movie that comes to my mind is A Bridge Too Far. And that's, I think events in there are pretty accurate. And Sosabowski is, I think what they get right in there is he is a real critic. And I read somewhere that Sosabowski, he was the commander of the Polish parachute regiment. And he gets relieved at the end of this, he's kind of scapegoated. And I read somewhere that, I can't remember somebody else commented that Sosabowski's mistake was he was right, but he told the commander that he was wrong, and that's why he was relieved. And but they did in the movie kind of catches his take no prisoners attitude in the movie. The rest of it, I think there's a lot of accuracy in there, but of course it has to be exciting to listen. So,
Jeff has a question.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Mrs. Williams. I want to get back to Patricia Dombrowski's question about why your
Okay.
uncle and aunt weren't arrested. And I was wondering if you could say more about
Yes.
his particular relationship with the Germans and
Okay.
the AK.
Okay, well, Professor Dombrowski, thank you for the question. At any rate, yes, and this is all covered in a chapter in my book, but my uncle great uncle Rudolf Tegel, was very closely associated with the Nazis in the region. He would dress up in lederhosen, and because he spoke perfect German, he would go out drinking with them. And he would go to the bars, and before he would go, he would drink a cup of pig fat, and he would never get drunk. And the word got around in the region that there was this man who never got drunk. And so the soldiers and higher-ups would come, and they would have drinking contests with him. And while these Nazis would get drunk, they would give a lot of information to my great uncle. He would take that information and he would bring it back. And for example, if a family was going to be murdered, then he would come back, and then my Aunt Rita would run to that person's house in the middle of the night, and they would evacuate and leave. So my great uncle Rudolf Tegel had these associations, and he used them very wisely. He was very much liked by all of these Nazis, and they considered him one of their own. He also signed the Volksdeutsch list at the request of the Polish underground army to keep this facade going. So he was a person, not only were they taking dynamite and, planting it in Nazi spaces and eliminating the enemy, but Rudolf Tegel was the mouthpiece for getting information for the whole area. But the Nazis trusted him, and after the war, he was arrested by the Soviet NKVD, and he was put in prison. And Stalin has their method of legalese is you arrest first and ask questions later. After there was a large investigation, he was let go. So everyone came, there were hundreds of people that came to his defense and said, no, he was a good Pole. So at any rate, there was an unusual relationship that happened there.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions, and one of them is on Zoom. So think hard. Who is going to be the last? You're going to be the last one, sir. Just a moment.
So I was told this is from your cousin, and he said, "Good afternoon, everyone. It's actually 9 p.m. here in Poland. So I'll say a quiet good evening as well. I'm texting this because I'm so incredibly moved and touched that it's easier for me to gather my thoughts this way. I want to congratulate Anne from the bottom of my heart. I'm so grateful to participate in this beautiful event with all of you, sending you love from across the ocean.
This may just be our largest international program that we have ever done.
Seems to me that you had a difficulty.
Yes, can you hold it closer, please?
Close.
Well, it seems to me you had a difficulty history before. Right up there, okay. The thing about it is, it's like all the smaller countries in Europe really have a difficult time with Germany, and now it's always Russia. So I don't think it's gonna stop anything. The bad thing about it is, that's why they had NATO, and NATO is trying to be crushed right now by Mr. Trump. And that's a serious thing because of the fact that if those smaller countries don't have protection from each one, it's gonna be another situation again. And people are gonna go through hell again, and that's not a very good thing, and that's the way I look at it.
Thank you.
Nope. Thank you. You wanna have, all right, we're gonna have the last word. Just to say,
About 10 years ago, I was given a book called The Question of Honor.
Yes.
And it's about the Kosciuszko, if I'm pronouncing.
Kosciuszko. Kosciuszko.
Brigade or squadron.
Yes, from the 303.
Recounts quite a bit of what you mentioned, and I think there was a movie made about him.
Yes.
Question of Honor is the name of the book.
Yes, there are quite a number of Polish films. Like, for example, Jackan is a film that maybe most of you are not familiar with. And the director, Andrzej Wajda, won an Academy Award for that film. You can find it. I don't actually know where you can pull it up, but if you look, if you Google it, you'll be able to find that movie. There's another movie that took place in Lviv. It also won an Academy Award, and the name escapes me at the moment, but it was filmed in Lviv when I was actually there. It'll come to me in a minute. But it was about the sewers of Lviv and how the Jewish children, families were hidden by a Ukrainian man and who protected them, and they survived the war. It's quite beautiful. If someone can look it up, it'll pop up on Dr. Google. But there are also a number of films on the Poles in the Battle of Britain, and if you just Google the Battle of Britain films, a number will come up.
thank you for a wonderful discussion. We're gonna turn the program over to conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you all for coming today. I appreciate it. I want to make sure we recognize the young and Libby for their help from the Brookhaven staff, community living staff, always provide us great support, and we're very thankful, Libby, for the job you guys do. Our next presentation will be supporting the Allied victory, the Yankee division in France in World War I. This is going to be on March 9th by Dan Leclerc. So March 9th is our next presentation. Phil just mentioned two books, so here's One No Greater Ally that talks about the Polish contribution to the British efforts. And then A Question of Honor is again on the Polish contributions in World War II. Those two books, as well as the 303 Squadron, were good references for a lot of the information I had. And thank you all for coming. Appreciate it very much.